You sure you want to answer? Yes. Are you going to yell at me if it's not the answer you want? No. You sure you're not going to yell at me? Right? That's how I was going to do. Let's get it straight. You're right. So then I would say, I think you could do better. You say, why? What's wrong with it? I said, look, I can't tell you what's wrong with it. I can only tell you that I see black as black, white as white. Don't tell me black is white and white is black. I look at the outfit to me is inappropriate. You want to wear it, There's nothing I can do to stop you anyway. It's to say to them, I'm like, yeah, how can I possibly stop you?
If someone is like in a conversation already with you and you realize that they're debating and arguing, how do you do it respectfully?
I just stop. It depends who it is. If it's somebody, most people who do it are being disrespectful to begin with, so I'm not too worried about respect. I just say, okay. Sometimes I'll just say, okay. I had a guy once walked into, I bought a product, and the guy said something about, he asked me in a challenging way about the hechsher. So I started answering him, and he started cutting me off. I said, well, do you want an answer? Are you asking a question? So he goes, yeah. I said, okay, if you ask me a question, here's the answer. But whenever you should know in general when you're attacked by people, and especially you guys are going to be vulnerable to this, we say, how come Orthodox Jews think they're better than everybody else? So when you're young and foolish, or why don't the religious Jews go to the army? Right? So if you're young and foolish, you start answering. When I was young and foolish, I would also start answering, and then it turns into a big argument. Nowadays, I stop people in their tracks. So I just say, how come Orthodox Jews are better? Do you want an answer? Yes. No. Yes. Right? Because then they realize that, if they, no. You want an answer? Okay, then I'm not going to, I've got the energy to argue with you. You want to ask me a question? I'll be glad to answer you. I'll give anybody an answer to any question if they ask respectfully. A kid once asked me, this was years ago, this kid was at a program, and a kid came over and said, why can't the rabbis do something to make it easier for women to get divorces from their husbands when the recalcitrant husband won't give a get? So I said to him, do you want an answer? Yes. So I started answering. So I gave an answer, and at a certain point he started arguing. I said, I thought you wanted an answer. He goes, yeah, but this is what I have to say. So I said to him, here's an answer to your question, Blake. I said to him, I'm really not interested in what you have to say. He was like, what? I said, listen, I only said this, I don't really believe this, but I only said it vis-a-vis the kid. I said to the kid, I'm an expert in my field. I've been studying this for the last 25 years. You haven't studied enough to even offer an opinion. So why would I want to hear your opinion? If you want to say your opinion, you can say your opinion to your friends also. Why do you have to tell it to a rabbi? Go tell your opinion to somebody else. Yeah, he just went, he kind of got huffed. He went, well, that's not fair. So and the reason I did that, and I did it in that way, because I felt more important for this kid was to understand that Torah isn't just a free-for-all where everybody could go and express opinions. Right? It wasn't about me against him. It's just I felt that lesson is much more important than the question that he's asking. The Torah's not free. You wouldn't go up to the guy who's building a bridge, who's an engineer, and tell him, well, I think you ought to use a few fewer suspension, whatever it is that you use in bridges. You wouldn't go tell a guy in medicine what you think. You would go tell in any field of life what you think. You're not you're a novice. You're not even a novice. You haven't even studied the subject. So I found it absolutely pointless. I had one guy once in England at the Ohr Somayach branch. This is actually cute. The guy came over to me after a shiur, and he asked me a question. So I said to the guy, and it was a nice guy, he was a sweet guy, and he asked a very challenging question. I said, do you want an answer? So he looks and he goes, well, yes, I do. No, I don't. I don't know. And just like that, we both started cracking up. We both started cracking up. So my brother used to do it to me, but I didn't realize till many years later, where I would say something to my brother, and he'd say to me something like, "Is that a question?" All right. And I didn't even know where he was going with it. And I've done this to my kids. What I used to do when they were younger, I'd say to them, why did you hit him? That wasn't a question. All right? Why did you hit him? Meaning you shouldn't have hit him. All right? They'll say, what do you call it? But to argue, I haven't got the energy. Who's got the energy there?
Moore's question. We have a good answer. It's the state that gets in the way.
It's the what?
It's the state that gets in the way. We have great answers.
There are answers. There are plenty of answers. The problem is first determining if the question. I have no problem giving an answer. My problem is whether or not a guy wants to hear an answer. If the guy doesn't want to hear an answer, what's the point?
Wait, real quick.
Yeah.
One more quick. So
yes.
Then if someone's like, well, why don't religious Jews go to the army? And if you don't have an answer, then
If you don't have an answer, he doesn't want an answer. He's making a statement.
I understand, but sometimes they actually.
If
they
somebody-
want the answer, but you're just like, I don't know. Let me get back. To
Good,
you.
good. That's the best answer. You know what? That's a great question. Let's research it together. Then you can bring him into Ohr Somayach and I'll talk to him. All right, and that's one of the best things you can do. Somebody's asking. Anybody has a right to ask any question they want if it's a respectful question. And if I don't know, that's the best thing to ask. You know, that's the best. I don't have to know. I don't know everything. My grandson asked me a question the other day. I said to him, I don't know. I have to check. I don't know. It's a good question. My grandson asked me actually a very good question. If you look back, you want to hear I just a very sharp question. And then if you take a look, all the way back in the book of Bereshit, when they mess up, Rabbi Shapiro is a very good question. If you look on page 16, it really stumped me. Then one of my other, my son-in-law came up with a very good answer, but my grandson asked a very sharp question. If you take a look, when God curses the serpent, it's 7 lines to the bottom. Vayomer Hashem Elokim el Nochash. See where it is on page 16? 7 lines from the bottom on page 16. Vayomer Hashem Elokim el Nochash. Ki asisazos, because you did this, Orur ata mikol behema mikol chayza, you're cursed. Al gechon chotelech, you're going to crawl on your belly. Ve'ofar toch al kol yemei chayecha, you're going to eat dirt your entire life, whatever that means. Ve'eva ashis beincho ve'en isha, I will create enmity between you and the woman. Uvein zarcha ve'en zarcha, hu yeshuv charosh, he'll step on your head. Ve'atat teshufenu akesh, and you'll nail him in the ankle. So my grandson asked me, well, one second, I understand. Who are we talking? We're talking about a curse to the Nachash right now. Right? We're talking about a curse to the snake. So the first part is a curse that he'll step on your head. But that the snake bites the human being is not a curse to the snake. That's a curse to the human being. We haven't gotten to the human curse yet. We'll get to the human curse. Good question, isn't it? It's a very good question. And I've read this pasuk a few times in my life, and I never noticed. It's a great question. Hu yeshuv charosh, that's a curse to the snake, that we're going to crush the snake's head. Ve'ata teshufenu akev, you're going to nail him in the ankle. What's that a curse? So wait, save that for when, the very next pasuk is El Ha'isha Amar. He talks to the woman, so he should say to the woman, and by the way, your curse is the snake's going to be biting you. Good question, Rabbi Shapiro, yeah? What do you say?
So I would say that you have to compare the ratio to the sefer, the beginning of the pasuk to the end of the pasuk. So when she wants to attack you, she's going to hit you in the head. If you want to fight back, you can reach only up to the ankle.
Oh, very good. That means the curse, this is what my son-in-law said very soon. He said, the curse of the snake is going to be that your height was reduced. The highest you could reach is the ankle. Very good. No, you're adding very, very important. He's adding that part of your curse is even when you fight back, you can only get the ankle. Then again, the ankle is our most vulnerable part. The back of the left foot is probably, when you take a shower, the part that should be washed the most and gets the least attention because it's way down there, right? You know how much time you spend scrubbing the back of your ankle. That's, especially when you got to balance yourself on a slick floor, and on one foot, most of us don't do that. So though that is definitely should get more attention than your shoulders or your chest, right? Because your feet are probably need more cleaning. That's a very good answer.
Why is that a punishment to be on the ankle though? To just only be able to reach.
In case he used to be tall, the snake used to be high. And now he's being punished. He's being punished that the highest you could possibly reach is the ankle. He used to be a 4-legged creature.
Spiritually?
I think
There's a spiritual component always, but just on a physical level, the snake was highest. The snake was a 4-legged creature. The Medrash says that if the snake wouldn't have sinned, we would have had 2 wonderful servants. The snake would have gone, and he would have gone to the ends of the earth and brought back diamonds and jewels for us. And he would also go on and plowed our fields, and he would also fertilize our fields. And we lost a tremendous servant when his feet were cut. So that's what it says. In any event, let's finish Parsha's Vayikra. Okay, just a few points. Yesterday we spoke about the poor man, and take a look at Perek Beis Pasuk Aleph, page 548. So in the bottom, 548, 3 lines to the bottom, it says, V'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha la'Hashem, 548, 3 lines to the bottom. V'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha la'Hashem. That doesn't say when a man brings a meal offering. How does he translate? A meal offering, made out of flour. It says a nefesh. It says a nefesh. Take a look at Rashi. Take a look at Rashi. Left column, about 9 lines from the bottom. V'nefesh kisakri, v'lo ne'amar nefesh b'chol korbanos dedava. It doesn't say the word nefesh by any of the volunteer offerings, ella b'mincha, only by a meal offering. Mi darko lehisnadev mincha. Who is it that's going to donate a meal offering, this volunteer meal offering? Ani, a poor man. Amar HaKodesh Baruch Hu, says Hashem, Ma'ale'ani olav ki'ilu hikriv nafsho. A poor man who brings a meal offering, it's as if he's offered his soul. Because when you give up, it's in many times it's harder for a poor man to give up a meal offering than it is for a rich man to give up a gift. You're giving, and I've told you many times that the idea that giving tzedakah's charity saves from death, because when you take money from somebody, you're taking part of their life. Stealing is considered there's a level of stealing which is seen as killing. When you take somebody's money, you're killing him. There's no capital punishment for it. But what you're doing when you're stealing somebody's money, you're stealing his life. I guess, how do people earn money? They work. Right? Work means you've given up time for your money. You've given up part of your life to make that money. Now I'm taking that money from you, except if you're Prince Charles, right, who never worked a day in his life. But most people who do work, so when you take their money, you're taking part of their life because you earn money by giving up your time, by working. That's why people don't like working. It takes time. So the Torah then describes 5 types of meal offerings that a poor man could give. When it comes to a rich man, you bring an animal. Okay, you bring this animal, that animal, but basically it's one animal. Whichever animal it is, there's only one thing you do with the animal. You shech it, you burn it, and that's a korban. When it comes to a meal offering, the Torah describes 5 variations of meal offerings that a poor man could bring. And the Mefarshim explain why that is that you want the poor man to feel that he's got a choice. That the poor man, he feels bad enough that he's poor. Like one poor guy said who was spending a lot of money, somebody said, "Hey, you can't afford that." He said, "Listen, it's not enough that I'm poor, I got to live like a poor man too." It's bad enough being poor. By the way, there's a medrash that says if you take all of life's suffering and you put it on one side of the scale, you put poverty on the other side of the scale, it'll weigh it down. How do you like that? Poverty will weigh it down. You know why? Because it affects every area of your life.
What does that mean, the poverty in that?
The poverty means when a person is struggling financially, it weighs down every aspect of your life. You can't afford the good things in life. You can't even afford the best doctor. Rich people go to the top surgeons, they go to the best doctors. You can't even afford the best doctor. You can't afford good food. You certainly can't afford tasty food. You can't afford, and then at night you can't sleep because you're worried about the next day. Your house you got a lousy house. The Gemara talks about a house, the Pasuk talks about a poor man's house is dripping down. And then there's a statement that says, the Gemara says, Kol Yemei Ani, I think the Pasuk says, Kol Yemei Ani Roim. All days of the poor man are bad. He's constantly suffering. So the Gemara says, what about Shabbos and Yantif? Shabbos and Yantif, you don't have anything on your head. So you know what the answer is? Shabbos and Yantif, he suffers too. You know why? Because he ends up with physical ailments because of the drastic switch any drastic switch in habit, right? So a rich man he's eating the finest meat during the week, so he eats more fine meat on Shabbos. He's used to that. But a poor man who's barely scraping by, he barely has 3 meals a day, and also on Shabbos he starts eating more than he normally eats. So then there's going to be a backlash, a physical backlash. He's not going to feel well from it. The Gemara says, "Kol yemei ani roi." In all suffering in life, you put it on one side, poverty outweighs it. It's constantly on a person. Finances are constantly, and by the way, in marriage, that's probably the biggest cause of strife in marriage is finances. Right, the Gemara says the fighting starts when the words of the Gemara where there's no more barley in the house. That means there's no money in the house. That's when the fighting starts. The wife has ideas of spending money. Husband has ideas of spending money. And it's like none. That's the husband's idea, right? And the wife needs to spend. And what often happens, the men are so unreasonable. The wife is usually asking for money because she needs to make food for him. And then the husband comes out and says, "How come there's no what do you call? How come we're eating sandwiches? Because you wouldn't give me money to go buy chicken. What do you want me to do?" Or the husband or the wife needs to go and pay. The wife, there's a bill. The wife tells the husband there's a bill, and the husband gets upset. They has to pay a bill. It's not her fault. It's not her fault. Bill has to be paid. Kids have to, you need shoes. Wait, you don't want your kids to have shoes? Fine, so they go without shoes. What do you want them to do? So it's a tremendous pressure on what you call it. It causes strife. You have to know how to handle it very well. A couple has to be on the same page, and they're not in most cases. Okay, that's the test. Okay, let's go to a couple more points I want to do here. All right, now if you take a look at Perek Beis Pasuk Yud Gimel. So it says, page 552, second two lines from the bottom, we're going to go into a very interesting concept here. V'chol korban minchascha b'melach timlach. Every korban, every mincha offering that you bring. A mincha, by the way, the mincha is not just the davening mincha. Mincha means the meal offering. You put salt on it. V'lo sashbis melach bris elokecha me'al mincha zari. You should not withhold the salt of the covenant of your God from your mincha offering. Al kol korban chatak melach. On all your korbanos you bring salt. That means all the korbanos we had a certain amount of salt that were put on them. Now, the idea, you'll notice that the Torah calls melach bris, a covenant of salt. That means there's a covenant between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Mizbeach, the altar, and the offerings certainly represent that covenant, the bond between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is salt called a covenant? Why is it a covenant of salt? Why is salt called a covenant?
Earlier I read in the text that it was about a promise to the ocean or the seas or something.
Before you get to the promises to the oceans and the seas, what else? Salt doesn't get stale. No, you've never been at a table where somebody put on salt and said, ooh, this salt is really stale. And to the contrary, salt's a preservative. We use,
Consistent throughout your life.
you could call it salt is a preservative. Salt keeps other things fresh. You can salt meat to keep the meat fresh, that sort of thing. Salt is a preservative. So the same way that salt doesn't become stale, the bond, the bris, the covenant between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't become stale. That's idea number one. Idea number two is more far-reaching, and that is, if somebody would ask you, what are the first two things that you would, what opposites? People always play. Let's play opposites. Okay? What's the first two opposites that come to mind? What's the first thing? What's that? Water and
Oil.
Water and oil. I wouldn't have said water and oil.
Dark and light.
Dark and light. I would have said water and fire.
Man and woman.
I would have said man and woman is, by the way, man and woman are opposites, and woman is fire, man is water, or Kabbalistically.
Moon and sun.
Woman and man are, and that's why woman, Isha, is Aleph Shin Hey. That means she got the word Aish in her name, Aish with a Hey at the end. Man also has fire in his name, Aleph Yud Shin, but he's got a Yud between the fire. That means when a woman, probably her fire is lit less often. But when it's fired, when she's lit up, look out, right? That's and if a man gets his wife upset, or anybody gets a woman upset, that Aish is there. And that's why the Gemara said that when a husband and wife live together in harmony, so you have the Yud from the man, and you have the Hey from the woman, which is Hashem's name, Ka. So the divine spirit, Hashem's Shechina, the presence of God, is there when a husband and wife, when there's harmony between them. But if you take away the Hashem's spirit, if you take away that, then all you're left is two fires. I remember when my first year of marriage, we were living right here up behind the Yeshiva, 135 in Mount Daphne. And there was a secular couple living in the building. That was my first year of marriage. I was trying to behave as well as possible, which wasn't great, but I was trying. At least I was trying. And there's this older married couple who were not religious, and at least once a week they would at night. She would just unload on him. I mean, she'd be screaming at him. I understood what Chazal meant when they talk about a fire. And she was the thing she was yelling at him. And all you'd hear is she's yelling, and he'd just give a very calm answer. And she's screaming, right? And it was sometimes about his girlfriend, and sometimes about this. And it just kind of rattled me as a newly married man. That kind of rattled me. That idea of that kind of screaming. And so fire represents those basic opposites that most people think of as fire and water. Fire and oil, water and oil is true, because water and oil, the oil floats to the top. They don't mix together. Most people, you ask them, what's the opposite of fire? Most people will tell you water. Like the water and fire, the water extinguishes the fire. Okay. There was a book written by a Reconstructionist rabbi. I don't know what Reconstructionist is. Probably, I guess it's some form of reform, right? But
Reform wasn't enough.
Reform wasn't enough, so it'd be Reconstructionist. Okay. There was by the way, I think Rabbi Gottlieb told us about this. There's a guy in a sociology class. So the instructor in college, the instructor turns to one guy. He says to the guy's name is O'Connor. He says, "O'Connor, you're Christian, aren't you?" He goes, "Yeah, can you tell us something about your religion?" So O'Connor gets up and he talks for about 10 minutes. And he sees another guy, the last guy's name is Mohammed. He says, you're a Muslim, aren't you? "Yeah, can you tell us something about your religion?" So he gets up, he talks for about 10 minutes. He says, Goldstein, you're Jewish, aren't you? He says, "Yeah." He says, "Goldstein, why don't you tell us something about your religion?" He says, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't." He says, "Why not?" He says, "'Cause I'm Reform." He says, "Well, don't you think you ought to know something about your religion before you reform it?" That one line pushed Goldstein off, and he turned into a Baal Tshuva as a result. That started his search. Because he went home and he thought to himself, "Hey, the guy's right. I don't know anything about my religion." So he started searching, like many people. I have a friend who was in a Catholic school, Catholic prep school, a very, very smart guy. And one day he gets called into the office by the principal, Bishop Garver. Bishop Garver calls, somebody taps him on the shoulder. He says, "Hey, Levin, Bishop Garver wants to speak to you." So he walks into the office, and Bishop Garver is the what do you call it, the principal of the school. And he says to him, "Levin, what's the difference between Maimonides and Nachmanides?" He looks at him and goes, "I never heard of either of them." A completely secular family, so I never heard of Maimonides, never heard of Nachmanides. So Garver reaches under his desk and he pulls out a translation of the Ramban in English. And he says to him, "Goldstein, go back to your people. You don't know what you're missing." I mean, Levin, he said, "Levin, go back to your people. You don't know what you're missing." He told me that he didn't know what hit him. You go, "What does this guy want from me?" To make a short story longer, he ended up going to the New Square Hasid. Somehow found his way to the New Square Hasidim in New York. He became a Baal Tshuva. Ended up in Ner Yisrael Yeshiva in Baltimore, where he got his smicha. And he said at his wedding, there were three people sitting at the head table: the Square Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Square Hasidim, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Ner Yisrael Yeshiva, and Bishop Garver was sitting there at the head table. He said Bishop Garver had more nachas than anybody. That's what he said to me. He said he was so happy that he got. Now this guy's very, very big for. He became a shul rabbi. Now he's involved in outreach. A very, very successful guy. So that triggered off. In any event, this Reconstructionist rabbi named Harold Kushner wrote a book, one of the biggest selling books in history, which is Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was one of the biggest selling books in history. At one point, I think it was only surpassed by the Bible and by Harry Potter, which tells you about how sophisticated our society is. So in his idea in the book, he himself suffered an intense personal tragedy. He had an 8-year-old son who developed what's called rapid aging disease. There's a fancy medical term for it. There are 21 cases in medical history where the kid is 8 years old. What's that?
Benjamin Buttons.
I don't.
It's a movie.
The answer is yes, even though.
Yeah, I don't know,
Cultural reference.
but the what he called is and what happens is that the kid. I saw a picture actually. The kid is 8 years old. He starts aging. There's nothing else wrong with him except that he's going through an aging process. His entire body and all of his what do you call it? All of his organs are aging, and at 12 years old he died, where he had the physiological makeup of an 80-year-old man, right? And the family just watches him wilt away, and he dies of this disease. So he wrote this book, and we're not judging his personal tragedy, but the claim that he makes in his book, and I don't know why it became so popular, because I would certainly hate to live like that. His claim was, God is good, and all good things come from God. Bad things are random and haphazard and happen independently of God, which is obviously heresy from a Torah point of view. That was the claim that he made. That's not the first person in history who's made that claim. Ancient philosophers made that claim as well. His book became very, very popular. The Torah over here wants to emphasize that we do not buy into that philosophy. And the way the Torah emphasizes that is by bringing salt on the Mizbeach. Salt represents the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rules the extremes. That means good, what we perceive as good, and what we see as bad in life is also a result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu controlling it. How does salt represent it? Because salt, on the one hand, has a characteristic of burning. If you leave salt on something, it could actually burn through. It's got the property of fire in it. But where does salt come from? It comes from the sea, so it's got the property of water. So salt represents the extremes. And therefore we put the salt on the Mizbeach, on the altar, in our devotion to God. We're making a statement that we believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rules the extremes. That means even something unpleasant that happens to somebody, assuming they haven't been reckless or absolutely careless, but something bad that happens to somebody, that is also being brought by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And his claim was that it's operating independently, randomly, and haphazardly, and it could strike anybody at any time, which is, I would much rather believe that God is doing it for a purpose than that it's random and haphazard and it's not, and it's happening. I don't know how that soothes anybody. I don't know. I don't know why the book became so popular. Rabbi Gottlieb obviously dissects all of his arguments, as Rabbi Gottlieb's rare ability to do so, and breaks it down. And first of all, he starts with, why bad things happen to good people. Well, how do you know that you're a good people? What makes you a good people? Did you put on tefillin today? Did you give charity? Where you first got to define what a good people is. Rabbi Gottlieb once told me he was on a panel, and I think this was when he was younger. He was a little Rabbi Gottlieb. He's usually the smartest person in the room. Whenever he's in the room, he's probably the smartest. He's always been the smartest person in the room. So he was on a panel, and it was a panel of parents who have suffered the pain of their children becoming Bali Chuvas. So he said there are 200 people in the audience whose kids became Bali Chuvas. There was a panel of rabbis, and the last woman of the evening, they're asking questions. The last woman of the evening gets up. She says, well, my daughter became a Bali Chuva, and she projects a holier-than-thou attitude, and is very irritating. So the first rabbi gets up, and he's very apologetic. We're not supposed to do that. We don't think we're better. Blah, blah, gives the whole thing. And the Rabbi Gottlieb is now the last speaker of the evening. If you can picture him doing this, he's the last speaker of the evening. And he says to her, well, did you ever cross your mind that perhaps she is holier than you? When is the last time you prayed? When is the last time that you did something? When was the last time you obeyed a rule? He shredded her. And he told me that he did it also for very much the reason that I did it to that kid. He didn't want 200 people leaving. The last speaker of the evening, the last question, he didn't want 200 people leaving with this idea that Bali Chuvas are a bunch of monsters who make everybody upset. And he felt that he's going to have to sacrifice the individual for the good of the cause. He said he heard later the lady hated him. but he, it was a calculated, and I happen to agree with him. You're starting off with a given. It's like that famous question, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Never heard that question, John? You never heard that? There's it's a trap. What are you going to answer? Have you stopped beating your wife yet? Yes. Which means you're right. No. No. Yeah. Either way you turn, you're finished.
I'm thinking about it.
I understand. I'm thinking about it. Doing it harder. Yeah, I understand. Either way you're finished. So she's starting with a given. Given that she's holy, she's projecting this thing. Now everybody's accepting her given. Well, who said your given is correct? Maybe it's your projection. It's a loaded question. I would have done the same thing if I would have thought of it. But that's the idea. Okay. Now, a very important concept. I want you to take a look. This is extremely important. Perek Daled Pasuk Yud Gimel. And this offering, page 558, is a very unique offering that's brought, and it's brought for specific circumstances. And this is a vital importance, gentlemen. On page 558, it says, V'im kol adas, top of the page, V'im kol adas Yisrael yishgu, if the entire Jewish people make a mistake, v'nelam davar me'enei hakol, ve'asu achas v'kol mitzvahs Hashem l'osei asenu ve'ashemu. They do something that they shouldn't have done. They mess up. The entire Jewish people messes up. What this describes is where the Sanhedrin has rendered a halachic decision. The people followed the halachic decision and they did something wrong. The Sanhedrin made a mistake. So a certain offering has to be brought. I'm not going to go into the details of the offering. What's crucial here is that, do you know that there's a tractate called Horius? one of the Masechtas in Shas, which discusses what happens when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. When big people, the Kohen Gadol, makes a mistake in his halachic ruling. And it's discussed in Masechta in Shas. The perception of the people outside look at us and they think that we think. This is what they think that we think that we're perfect. And we know we are anything but perfect. That's why when a religious man does something wrong, they jump on it. See, a religious man embezzled. Who said we can't and who said we don't? If the Torah says don't steal, that means we're capable of stealing. If the Torah says don't murder, we're capable of murdering. We do it a whole lot less than everybody else. And the thing, we're held to a much higher standard than everybody else. But no one ever said that we're infallible, and not even the leaders are infallible. Now I want to show you something remarkable. Take a look, not every name, but almost every name of everybody in the Torah. We'll start with Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon is criticized. Adam is criticized, made in the image of God, and he's criticized. He did not, the original sin. Chava is criticized. Noach, who's called a tzaddik tamim, got drunk. Right? He's criticized. Avram Avinu is criticized. He said to Hashem, B'me'eda, how will I know that we're going to inherit the land? They got punished with 210 years, 400 years of exile for those two words of B'me'eda, ki irashena. How do I know I'm going to inherit the land? The flaw in faith at Avram Avinu's level. Yitzchak is shown to not have seen through Esav. Esav deceived him. Yaakov married two wives. He got upset with Rachel. He's criticized for getting upset with Rachel when she was upset that she didn't have children. Moshe Rabbeinu got angry. Aaron was involved with the golden calf. Miriam spoke Lashon Hara. Pick a name in the Torah and you'll find almost every name there is some sort of criticism for that. Right? Nobody, you don't see that anywhere else. You don't see Mohammed. There aren't too many negative statements about Mohammed, and the people who made negative statements about Mohammed lost a lot of weight very quickly. Right? Their head was chopped off. Right? They didn't. There was a sudden 10-pound weight loss program. Right? Criticize the new 10-pound weight loss and lose 10 pounds instantly. Criticize Mohammed. Right? What's his name? I've never read the New Testament, but there isn't too much criticism about him, right? He's just, I don't know, what is he? He's a water skier or something, I'm not sure exactly what. I'm not sure what exactly, but it was just wonderful, just great and wonderful. And in the Torah, all of a sudden, everybody, you pick a name, and everybody's got a flaw. The answer is what the Torah is saying is we're not flawless. There's a pasuk that says, Ein Adam Tzadik B'Aretz Asher Yaseh Tov V'Lo Yechata. There is nobody who is perfect who doesn't sin. 4 people, the Gemara says, 4 people died sinless. And even that is not agreed on by everybody. The Gemara says there are 4 people who died Be'ityo Shel Nachash. 4 people in history died because of the decree that came about of the serpent, which means that God decreed death on mankind. That means there were 4 people who didn't deserve to die. And they died what's called sinless, and some opinions say, no, they didn't die sinless, it's just that they didn't sin bad enough to have to die. And the reason they died is because God decreed people have to die. So the Torah is telling you, we never said that we're perfect. We never said that we're flawless. And it's a very big misconception that people have, because that's what people think that you're thinking. People think that you're thinking, oh, you're just so wonderful. How could religious Jews go and do this? And how could religious go throw stones at cars and shops, or burn fire garbage dumpsters in Mea Shearim when they're protesting and do something wrong? The answer is because they're human beings who have a big Yetzer Hara like every other human being. They're not, the fact that they're wearing a black hat doesn't, you don't put on a black hat and automatically become a tzaddik. It doesn't work that way. You have to work on yourself. And we never claim that we are flawless. And the Torah is telling you, even the Sanhedrin could make a mistake in a ruling, and we need a whole tractate to deal with it. And that itself is a lesson to us. The fact that there's a tractate, that itself is a lesson to us. Hey guys, we never said that we're perfect. On the other hand, the Gemara says that the criticism of the Jewish people is a sign of the greatness of the Jewish people. So when the Jewish people are criticized, if you ever saw, imagine you see 2 religious Jews get into a fist fight. What would your reaction be?
We did.
Yeah, imagine you're in shul. Imagine you're in shul and 2 guys get into a fist fight, which has happened in shuls, by the way. It's happened. I missed it that time. I was already in Israel. My mother said to me, "Oh yeah, this week in shul, two guys were talking. And one of the guys turned around. They're talking during the Torah reading. One of the guys turned around and shh, and they just kept on. So they ignored him like a fly on the wall. And he just turned around and clocked one of the guys behind him. And I missed shul that week. How do you like it? Right? He clocked them, in which I'm sure, by the way, there was some history there also. You don't usually clock people. That means this is the guy. These two guys were probably looking for his excuse to clock him, right? Yeah. What's there? And everybody's, my goodness, hitting a religious Jew hitting. Now, what if I told you there was the two Italians? Right? You know, your reaction is like, what took him so long? You know, it took 20 minutes till he punched him. You know, what took so long? The answer is the criticism of the Jewish people is already part of the praise. If we're criticized for that, about one of my warmest childhood memories was my older brother, who was the goody-goody, the tzaddical, who was always skipping grades. And, you know, he was brilliant. And then one day, I think he came home with a 91 on a test. And my parents were like, what happened with the test? What, he didn't study? And they didn't pressure. They never pressured, but for him it was, because he didn't study for the test. I don't remember what happened. I think he came back with a 90. That was like a meeting, a closed door meeting behind, you know, I was so happy. I was so happy. I got a 77. We went out to a restaurant that night, you know. I was so happy he was getting in trouble. My parents also got upset at him once because some other kid in the class was copying off him and got the award. He got some sort of award copying off my brother. He got a higher grade. He got the same grade, and he got the award. He had copied off my brother, and my brother just didn't care. You know, and my parents they also weren't those type of parents. I just remember this. I don't even know what happened, but I just remember that tells you something about the person. That tells you, well, you know, I saw a guy bench. That's how you bench? It took you so fast you benched in a minute and a half? Hey, you're forgetting something. He benched. Right? That's the criticism tells you what we expect of the people. So if we're criticized for something like, oh yeah, I forgot to daven mincha today. You know, well, you know, look out. Okay, that tells you something. This is a person we expect to be davening. That's a very high expectation. And the higher the expectation, that's why the criticism tells you, okay, tomorrow we'll start Parsha Tzav.